Hey everybody, Josh Collacchi here, and I'm here to discuss Week 1 in NFL Daily Fantasy Football. You've seen us talk about quarterbacks, you've seen us talk about running backs, and now it's time to move on to NFL wide receivers for Week 1. And it actually seems like it's the most important part of daily fantasy football, at least to me, is that you have to hit on those wide receivers, because if you don't, those other positions aren't going to be enough to kind of carry you into cash unless you have an absurd amount, like a quarterback throws 6 touchdowns or a running back rushes for over 200 with a few touchdowns. So moving on to this Week 1 slate where we have 14 games, of course, or 15 games rather. The first 16th game is the Patriots and the Steelers play on Thursday night, and that will not be included in this piece as we're going to be focusing on the big Sunday slate. So we're going to have 30 teams playing, and there's a lot of receivers to get through. So let's go right into it. The first two guys I wanted to talk about are my top 2 Tier 1 options, and those are two guys facing each other, and Odell Beckham Jr. for the Giants against Dallas Cowboys, and the guy I like from that side, of course, is Dez Bryant. I want to talk about Beckham first. He's the second most expensive wide receiver for the weekend slate, but he has the most effective matchup against the Cowboys simply because he's going to be lining up against either Brandon Carr or Morris Claiborne. In Odell Beckham's last game against Dallas, he had 10 catches for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, that seemed like another walk in the park for a guy like Beckham as he was on that torrid start to his career last year. But it's interesting to see that he did that against the Cowboys defense, who really isn't much different this year. Now, the one thing is with Victor Cruz back at some point this season, doesn't look like he's going to be ready for Week 1. Some think that Beckham's not going to see that high volume of targets, and maybe he's not going to see the same production. But in Week 1, it doesn't look like Victor Cruz is going to play, so expect that high volume of targets again. And as one of the most agile and athletically gifted players in the NFL, look for Odell Beckham to be another top receiver for Week 1. On the other side is Dez Bryant. There's not much more we can say about this guy. He's arguably one of the top receivers in the NFL. And some think he is the top receiver in the NFL simply because of his ability in the red zone and his strength with the football. Last year against the Giants, who he faces in Week 1, in these 2 games, he had 22 targets, and he caught 16 of those for 237 yards and 2 touchdowns. The cornerbacks he faced in those games, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie and Prince Amukamara. Both those corners are starting for the Giants, and it's very telling because that means Dez Bryant's going to see these guys once again. We saw what he did to them last year. So another year under his belt, he has that contract situation figured out. He's going to be ready to prove his worth, and I think the Cowboys are going to throw the ball a lot more this year without DeMarco Murray. Tony Romo is one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL, and Dez Bryant's his top option. So he makes for a very good choice for your lineups in Week 1 if you can afford a top-tier receiver. Now, you can't always afford to pay up for those guys if you like to spend up on quarterback or running back. You're going to need some Tier 2 or even cheaper wide receivers. My first Tier 2 guy is a guy that I really like in cash this week, and that's Jarvis Landry for the Miami Dolphins. Landry's like what we like to call a PPR superstar for those of you playing regular fantasy sports, and PPR is actually on FanDuel's scoring system. You get a half a point for each catch. Now, what this means is he gets most of his points from catching the ball and getting yards. He's not a big touchdown guy, but you like to use these guys in cash because they have a very low floor, or very high floor rather, and that's a big thing we like to target for cash games as a little bit of a safe option. Last season as a rookie, Landry caught 84 passes. And it's one thing about these guys is that they can get a high number of catches. Their floor is sitting at 3 or 4 points, and that's before you even look at yards, which is likely to be well over 40 or 50 at the absolute least with that amount of catches. Now, the fact is he's facing the Redskins in Week 1, who I think are one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. Of course, they're going to be without their top cornerback in Rashad Breeland. Now, the one thing about Landry is he lines up in the slot a lot, which means he's likely to see either Justin Rogers or David Anderson. Anderson looks like to be the guy that covers the right slot. It's usually where Landry lines up. And if you've seen Anderson play before, he's one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL in terms of man coverage. So it's something to look at, and it's a matchup to exploit. And I think that's why Landry is my top tier, or my top number 2 receiver in the second tier. The other guy is very similar player. He's a little bit smaller. He doesn't have as good of hands, but he's a lot faster, and he's a very efficient, very good, crisp route runner, and that's John Brown, who's the slot receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He looked like he was going to be the number 2 receiver, but it seems like Michael Floyd is probably going to be playing. Now, that being said, The way Bruce Arians likes to run his offense is he likes to max protect a lot, keep 2 tight ends into block, maybe a running back into block or chip off the edge rusher, and likes to throw the ball down the field. A guy like John Brown is going to be able to beat these bigger cornerbacks we're seeing in the NFL. And the guy that he's going to be lining up, or is likely to line up against, is Brandon Browner for the New Orleans Saints. Now, Brandon Browner is an excellent big corner, 6'4", 220 pounds, but he's not very fast. So Brown looks to take advantage of a slower-footed receiver, and he could possibly see maybe a deep touchdown, or definitely see a lot of underneath routes where he has a chance to get around Browner and pick up some yards after the catch. Moving on to Tier 3, this guy is a guy that a lot of people will be targeting in Week 1 simply because of the new role he has in the Packers offense. And you guessed it, it's Davante Adams, 5,500 on FanDuel. He's likely to be the number 2 receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, number 1 is Randall Cobb. But the one thing about Adams is he's likely to line up at the X position, which is the left side all the way to the left wide out for the Green Bay Packers. And what that is that means he's going to be the top target in terms of outside receivers for Aaron Rodgers. Now, that in itself is worth value, but a guy that's at 5,500 and he's going to be facing the Chicago Bears, which likely is going to be against Kyle Fuller, who started off very hot last season, but after he got injured, he really slowed down a lot. So we're wondering if that was a rookie wall or maybe that's just how he is. But either way, it's a good matchup for Adams at that price with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers throwing to him. It makes for a top-tier play, especially on value at 5,500 on FanDuel. Last guy I wanted to talk about is a punt option, and Devin Funchess of Carolina, just 4,600. What I mean by punt option is that's a guy that really costs close to minimum salary, and you can just kind of throw him in if you don't have much money left. Now, be sure to take advantage of the depth charts and the lineup page, and you can really see who's starting. If Devin Funchess is starting, he's worth a play because there really just aren't that many other options for Carolina. The one thing, if he doesn't start, he's still going to see a lot of reps in the red zone, so it will be a very low-owned play, considering if he doesn't start, he won't be highly owned because people really like to just target the top 2 receivers on each team. But considering those top 2 receivers for the Panthers aren't big guys and they're not really guys that have been full of talent, Devin Funchess has that ability to catch a touchdown pass given his height and weight and actually his speed across the middle. So if he does get into the game and it does start, he has a chance to score a touchdown at any time. And kind of like what Kelvin Benjamin was last year in terms of forcing targets, I think that's what's going to happen to Funchess. So keep an eye on that. It's a very good punt option against the Chicago Bears. And the one thing about not the Chicago Bears, I guess Funchess is facing the Jacksonville Jaguars. Sorry about that. The one thing about the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, now that I think about it, is they have 2 short cornerbacks. One of them is Aaron Colvin. They're not going to be able to match up with a guy like Funchess who's 6'5". So be sure to keep that in mind when making your lineups. If you don't have much cash left for a receiver, throw him in there as a cheap punt play that you can use in GPPs. That wraps up our receivers for Week 1. Be sure to keep an eye out for all the rest of these videos on RotoCurve for Week 1. We have quarterbacks posted, running backs, receivers, tight ends, a bunch of tools coming. We have some sleeper thing coming tomorrow. So be sure to keep an advantage of everything you have on RotoCurve, and let's make Week 1 in NFL a profitable one. Good luck, everybody.